Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy insists Ukraine's striving for peace a day before crucial talks with the US in Saudi Arabia. Canada's next Prime Minister, Mark Carney, vows to win the trade war with President Donald Trump. The Syrian Defense Ministry says an operation against Assad loyalists is now over as the death toll from Syrian clashes and revenge killings reaches over 1,000 people. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has arrived in Saudi Arabia ahead of crucial peace talks between his team and US officials. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman will meet Zelenskyy and the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio separately ahead of the talks. They come just 10 days after President Donald Trump and Zelenskyy clashed at the White House. Over the weekend, speaking to Fox News' channel's Sunday Morning Futures, Trump suggested Ukraine may not survive the war against Russia, even if American support continues. Let's take a look.
Well, it may not survive anyway, but, we have some weaknesses with Russia. It takes two. Look, it was not going to happen, that war, and it happened. So now we're stuck with this mess.
For more on this, I'm joined by our correspondent, Ross Cullen, who's in Kyiv for us. Ross, thank you so much for joining us. These talks come at a very testing time for Kyiv. Zelenskyy has insisted he's fully committed to them before traveling to Saudi, but he's not expected to be at the talks himself, is he?
No, that's right. President Zelenskyy and President Trump will not be attending those talks on Tuesday. They're not going to be at presidential level. The talks will be at ministerial level. Certainly, we know the tensions between the two leaders, well, they were laid bare, as you mentioned, Leigh-Ann, on the 28th of February in that bus stop at the White House when President Trump ordered Volodymyr Zelenskyy to leave immediately after he had been publicly berated by the US leader and the US Vice President J.D. Vance. All of this chaotic news conference happening in front of the world's media, really putting relations between Washington and Kyiv at a very low ebb indeed. And this took this chance on Tuesday to have these talks to try to reshape the narrative, to try to paint a more positive picture, part of a reset between the United States and Ukraine. If they can start to find common ground and work together, potentially towards a minerals deal, potentially towards a peace agreement. So there's lots to discuss, but President Zelenskyy will not be there. We know how dissatisfied the United States is with his leadership, so that is one area where that potential for controversy has been removed.
Indeed, Ross, and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio will be leading the talks on the US side. What's his key objectives going into these discussions?
Well, the United States certainly wants Ukraine to signal its willingness to end the war, its willingness to achieve peace. The United States will also want to hear if there are any concessions that the Ukrainian leadership may be willing to give in order to be able to work towards peace negotiations with Russia. The US will also want to hear about this minerals deal, saying that it's ready to sign up. Is Ukraine ready to sign? Can we get that over the finish line? We have heard ahead of the talks that the US would also want to see a framework for an initial ceasefire agreed during these talks in Jeddah on the Red Sea coast, and potentially also work between the two sides towards that defining peace agreement to try to end the war.
Ross, these talks are taking place as Russian forces are increasing pressure on Ukrainian forces in parts of Russia's Kursk region. Can you tell us why this is so significant?
Yeah, Leigh-Ann, the Kursk region is really important because in August 2024, the Ukrainian forces launched a surprise counterattack inside Russia for the first time that any foreign forces had been inside the Russian Federation since the end of the Second World War, caught Russia by surprise, caught the world's media by surprise. Thousands of Ukrainian troops taking some 500 square miles of territory inside Russia, and they were hoping to be able to hold that, potentially to use as a bargaining chip to say to Moscow, well, we could give back some of your territory that we hold if you could give back some of our territory that you hold. However, Russian forces, often being supported by thousands of troops that have been sent to Russia by North Korea, have been fighting back against the Ukrainian offensive inside Kursk recently, even walking for miles through disused gas pipeline tunnels to be able to come up to the rear of Ukrainian forces and surprise them. Russia has taken back more than half of that territory originally seized by Ukraine, and so Ukraine will be really hoping to hold on to that, because if it doesn't, it loses that potential bargaining chip in any future negotiations with Russia. Leigh-Ann?
Ross Cullen in Kyiv, thank you so much for joining me. For more on this, I'm joined by Saudi and US political expert Ahmed al-Ibrahim, who joins me now from Riyadh. Ahmed, good evening to you. Thank you for joining me. What's Saudi Arabia's role in the talks this week? We've already seen talks with the Russian and US delegation previously.
Well, definitely. The visit of Zelenskyy over here underscores the importance of Saudi Arabia being the mediator and basically filling the gaps of the communication is happening. And hopefully it would reach some sort of a restart of going forward with this kind of negotiation or the peace negotiation that's it's going to happen. So we have the first time, we have the Americans meeting the Russians, and today we have the Americans are meeting the Ukrainians. So I think there is some deals on the table. There is some issues with Ukraine from the American part. It also needs to be resolved, which is basically we did not see that in the first meeting between the Russians and the Americans. So now it's the ball is in the court of the Ukrainians. They have some demands, they have some sticking points, and Saudi Arabia is trying basically to knock some sense in the all parties so they can basically come to a conclusion and have some a roadmap for a good peace talk in the future.
What are the major sticking points expected to be during the talks tomorrow? You just mentioned there some of the things that Saudi has to help mediate.
Well, definitely what comes to my mind, there is probably 4 sticking points. The first one is the territorial issue with Ukraine. Ukraine still believes that Russia needs to withdraw from some of the geographical area that was conquered by the Russians, and these are non-negotiable. And Russia is also at the same point. So this is also Saudi Arabia needs to work and mediate these kind of things with the allied parties that they're going to negotiate this peace between Ukraine and Russia. The second thing is the security guaranteed. We all understand that the Minsk accord has been violated, and Ukraine does not want this to happen, and they want some guarantees into the future. Wherein the Russians, they want some guarantees for point number 3. They don't want any NATO involvement in Ukraine. They want Ukraine to be basically withdrawn from all NATO's agreement, and there is no future probably application that's going to be submitted, and this has to be guaranteed to the Russians in order to basically move forward with the peace plan. And the last point probably is the economy or probably the relief, the sanction and the relief for the Russians. They are looking forward to remove all these kind of sanction on Russia, and the West and Ukraine is actually seeing these sanction is a bargaining tool or a way to basically bend the Russians in order to come into terms.
The Saudi Crown Prince will meet Marco Rubio and also Zelenskyy ahead of the talks. How will hosting these meetings and a lot of the peace talks help to raise Saudi Arabia's profile geopolitically?
Well, definitely, to be honest with you, it's not an easy job for MBS to basically try to bring this deal, but it seems it's going forward and they keep coming back to Saudi Arabia. As you know, Saudi Arabia has been, standing in a very neutral way between Russia, between Ukraine, and I think this is the best geographical spot for them to mediate this and to have peace. Saudi has been showing for the past years their capability and their international influence. MBS personally, he has been a peace man. He zeroed all his problems in the region, and the biggest one is with Iran. So, and actually, he negotiated releasing the Ukrainian and the American hostages from Russia. So definitely, this is going to be a hard job on MBS. He needs to fill the gaps. He needs to bring the ideas together on the ground, and he needs to play the role of mediation. Now, having said all that, if goes well and this peace process comes into term in Saudi Arabia, this is going to position Saudi Arabia with the leading MBS to the whole world as being the spot of, knocking some sense and bring peace to the world. And this is definitely going to put so much weight to Saudi Arabia and the international community.
Ahmed al-Ibrahim, Saudi and US political expert. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Israel has stopped supplying electricity to the Gaza Strip a week after blocking all aid into Palestinian territory. Energy Minister Cohen said Israel would use all the tools at their disposal to bring back the hostages and ensure Hamas is no longer in Gaza the day after. It comes ahead of fresh talks in Qatar regarding an extension to the ceasefire. An oil tanker and cargo ship have collided off the Lincolnshire coast of the UK, with 32 casualties reported. The tanker caught fire with the lifeboats and helicopters deployed to the scene. The Lara Ali have reported that a number of people have abandoned the vessels. Over 40,000 people in Germany have been affected by a surprise strike closing Hamburg airport. The walkouts began yesterday morning, giving short notice to passengers who were told to stay away from the terminals. Hamburg airport said only 10 of 280 departures and arrivals went ahead as scheduled on Sunday. And a British man has been charged in London after climbing the Tower of Big Ben. 29-year-old Daniel Day appeared in court facing allegations of intentionally or recklessly causing a public nuisance and trespassing on a protected site. Day was carrying a Palestinian flag and was stood on the ledge of the London landmark for more than 16 hours before he was removed. Now to Canada, where Mark Carney has been announced as Justin Trudeau's successor as the country's Prime Minister. The former governor of the Canadian Central Bank and of the Bank of England triumphed over 3 other political candidates in the Liberal Party's leadership race. Carney has been an outspoken person on President Trump's imposed tariffs on Canada and his comments about making the country's America's 51st state. Sarah Firth has been following this story for us.
Fighting talk from Canada's Mark Carney, just moments after he's announced as the country's new incoming Prime Minister.
America is not Canada, and Canada never, ever will be part of America in any way, shape, or form.
The rhetoric, no surprise, given the unfolding trade war sparked by Trump's claims Canada is ripping Americans off.
Because Canada has been ripping us off for years on tariffs for lumber and for dairy products. 250%, nobody ever talks about that, 250% tariff which is taking advantage of our farmers. So that's not going to happen anymore. They'll be met with the exact same tariff unless they drop it. And that's what reciprocal means.
This week, Trump is still set to impose a 25% tariff on steel and aluminium imports, of which Canada in particular is a major exporter of to the United States. Carney, though, vowing his priority will be to come up with a plan to build a stronger Canadian economy and to create new trading relationships with what he says will be reliable trading partners.
There's someone who's trying to weaken our economy. Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, as we know, has put, as the Prime Minister just said, unjustified tariffs on what we build, on what we sell, on how we make a living. He's attacking Canadian families, workers, and businesses, and we cannot let him succeed. And we won't. We won't.
Outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, though, leaving with a warning about the economic crisis and calling these dark days brought on by Canada's neighbour.
And make no mistake, this is a nation-defining moment. Democracy is not a given. Freedom is not a given. Even Canada is not a given.
Canada strong. That was the incoming leader's main message. The Canadian government has already retaliated with their own tariff threats, which the new PM claims will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact in Canada. But as sparks continue to fly in this increasingly heated trade war between the neighbouring countries, both leaders are vowing to win. One thing, though, is already clear. Right now, it's the American and Canadian people feeling the impact. Sarah Firth, Al Arabiya.
The US has defended its recent meeting with Hamas as the Trump administration attempts to bring the hostilities in Gaza to a close. Talks for the second phase of the ceasefire are due to resume in Qatar this week. US envoy for hostages Adam Borla told Al Arabiya News he is optimistic about their conversation and the return of the remaining hostages.
The reason that I met with Hamas like that is because I'm a big believer in dialogue. I think that through dialogue, one gets to understand various people. And I think the meetings with Hamas gave me some hope. One, it gave me hope that there would eventually be an end to something that's not productive for many countries. It gave me hope that there would be an opportunity to rebuild Gaza, and that there was some flexibility on the Hamas side where there wasn't. So I know there's talks going on this week, but I'm cautiously optimistic about some advances, and especially about some hostages coming out. And I thought from the conversation that there was possibility to get something done in a way that would work for the region. I did believe that. Now, it's very easy to say that. It's very different to do it. And part of my belief, because one of the questions becomes, how do you set it up so that Hamas doesn't rearm? Well, I need to trust probably a pan-Arab force to do that. Now, do I trust them? I'll tell you something. Yeah, we've had a long history with modern Arab countries, and I know that certain countries, if they tell me something, they're going to do it, and they're going to do it well.
The Syrian Defense Ministry says an operation against Assad loyalists is now over. Revenge attacks have taken place in Syria's Alawite community over the weekend. killing over 1,000 civilians, including women and children, in so-called field executions. Those belonging to the Alawite group were once empowered by former President Bashar al-Assad, who was ousted last November after opposition groups took over. It's believed the violence is amongst the deadliest since the conflict in Syria began 14 years ago, with parts of the region left without electricity and drinking water. Let's take a look at the top business news now. JP Morgan has joined Wall Street peer Goldman Sachs to forecast a boost to the euro area's economic growth for 2025 on the back of Germany's fiscal loosening reforms. Similar to Goldman, the brokerage expects growth to increase by 0.1 percentage point to 0.8%. However, JP Morgan is cautioning uncertainty from Trump's tariff policy could likely weigh on economic growth in the coming months. President Trump says his administration is in touch with 4 different groups about the sale of Chinese-owned social media platform TikTok. The fate of TikTok has been uncertain since a law requiring its owner, ByteDance, to either sell it on national security grounds or face a ban that took effect in January. Trump signed an executive order seeking to delay the enforcement of the law by 75 days. Turning to sports news now. Former Newcastle United and Fulham forward Alexander Mitrovic missed training with Al Hilal because of an abnormal heart rhythm. Local media have reported that the 30-year-old was taken to hospital after scoring for the Saudi Pro League champions on Friday. Mitrovic had just returned from a hamstring injury that had kept him out of action since January. And Dutch athlete Maureen Koster suffered a fall and was knocked unconscious during the women's 3,000 metres at the European Indoor Championship in the Netherlands. Koster, who won silver in 2015 and had finished second in the qualifying race, was treated by medical staff next to the track on Sunday. The 32-year-old was later transported to hospital. Her team now say she is conscious and responsive. A reminder of our top stories. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy insists Ukraine striving for peace a day before crucial talks with the US in Saudi Arabia. Canada's next Prime Minister Mark Carney vows to win the trade war with President Donald Trump. The Syrian Defense Ministry says an operation against Assad loyalists is now over as the death toll from Syrian clashes and revenge killings reaches over 1,000 people. That's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. A special interview with the CEO of Dow Jones is coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. Good night and thank you for joining us.